I never imagined that a piece of paper tacked to my front door would lead to one of the most satisfying acts of revenge I had ever experienced, but there it was, a wedding invitation not addressed to me, mind you, but listing my historic family home as the venue for some stranger's nuptials. At first I thought it was a bizarre prank, but the crisp cream-colored paper, with its embossed gold lettering, looked far too expensive for a practical joke. The names Rebecca and James Thornton meant nothing to me, and yet, according to this invitation, they planned to hold their wedding in my backyard in exactly 3 weeks. I stood on my porch, morning coffee growing cold in my hand, as confusion gave way to disbelief, and disbelief quickly transformed into white-hot anger. My name is Michael Foster, a 38-year-old architect, who had recently returned to my hometown of Willowbrook to restore my grandmother's Victorian farmhouse after her passing 6 months ago. The property had been in our family for over 100 years, a stunning 5-acre parcel with gardens that had once been featured in home and garden magazines back in the 1980s. My grandmother, Eleanor Foster, had been a respected botanist who transformed the grounds into a showpiece of native plants and heritage roses. When I inherited the estate, I took a sabbatical from my firm in Chicago to honor her memory by bringing the property back to its former glory. The house needed work. The roof leaked in 3 places, the plumbing was temperamental at best, and the once vibrant gardens had become overgrown after Gran's long illness. But beneath the neglect lay the bones of something magnificent. I took the invitation inside and called the number printed at the bottom. After several rings, a harried-sounding woman answered. "Hello, Thornton Caldwell Wedding. Rebecca speaking," she chirped, in a voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I explained as calmly as possible that there seemed to be some confusion about the venue for her wedding. "Oh, you must be calling about the parking arrangements," she said dismissively. "We have arranged for guests to park along Maple Lane, so your driveway will not be blocked." My patience evaporated like morning dew in August. "No, Miss Thornton, I am calling because you have apparently scheduled your wedding at my private residence without permission," I stated flatly. "I am Michael Foster, the owner of the property you have listed on your invitation." The silence that followed lasted several heartbeats before Rebecca's voice returned, no longer syrupy, but sharp as a newly honed knife. "This is ridiculous. I have already paid the venue fee to the Willowbrook Heritage Association. Everything has been arranged for months. The Foster Gardens is a registered historical venue. It says so right on the town website." I pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling a headache forming behind my eyes. "The property was never registered with any heritage association," I explained. "It is my private residence, and I have never given permission for events." Rebecca's derisive laugh cut through the phone line. "Well, I have a contract that says otherwise. I suggest you take it up with Cynthia Morgan at the Homeowner Association. I have 200 guests coming in 3 weeks, many from out of state. This venue will be ready." Before I could respond, she hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in stunned silence. The Willowbrook Homeowner Association? I was not even a member of any homeowner association. Gran had specifically purchased this land because it fell outside the boundaries of the adjacent planned community. I immediately searched online for information about this supposed heritage association and found an official-looking website showcasing several historic properties in the area available for wedding rentals. There, prominently featured, was my grandmother's house listed as Foster Gardens, Victorian elegance for your special day. The description boasted mature gardens, a picturesque gazebo, and a charming historical farmhouse preserved as a community treasure. My blood pressure skyrocketed as I scrolled through photographs of my own property, clearly taken recently without my knowledge or consent. The site listed Cynthia Morgan as the booking coordinator, with rental rates starting at $4,000 for a basic package. I recognized the name immediately. Cynthia Morgan was the president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowner Association, the upscale development that bordered my property to the south. I had met her briefly after moving in, when she had appeared on my doorstep with a folder full of community guidelines that she insisted applied to my property, guidelines I had promptly tossed in the recycling bin after explaining that my land was not part of her jurisdiction. I threw on a jacket and drove straight to the address listed as the Homeowner Association office, a small brick building in the center of Willowbrook Estates. The receptionist, a young woman with an elaborate French braid and a name tag reading Ashley, greeted me with rehearsed cheerfulness. "I need to speak with Cynthia Morgan immediately," I stated, making no attempt to match her pleasant tone. Ashley's smile faltered slightly as she tapped at her keyboard. "Do you have an appointment, sir? Ms. Morgan is very busy with the spring planning committee this morning." I leaned forward, placing both palms on her desk. "Tell her Michael Foster is here about the unauthorized use of his property as a wedding venue. I will wait." 10 minutes later, I was ushered into a conference room where Cynthia Morgan sat at the head of an oval table, surrounded by 4 other people who watched my entrance with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Cynthia herself had not changed since our first meeting. Her blonde bob was immaculately styled, her navy blazer perfectly pressed, and the string of pearls around her neck caught the light as she turned to face me. "Mr. Foster," she said with a tight smile that did not reach her ice blue eyes, "what seems to be the problem?" The false concern in her voice made my skin crawl. "The problem, Ms. Morgan," I replied evenly, "is that you are advertising my property as a wedding venue without permission, taking money for bookings, and allowing strangers to plan events on my land." A ripple of whispers ran through the room, but Cynthia's expression remained unchanged. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," she said smoothly. "The Foster property was added to our Heritage Sites program last year. Your grandmother signed the agreement herself." She nodded to a man sitting to her right, who slid a document across the table toward me. I picked it up, immediately recognizing a poor attempt at forging my grandmother's signature on what appeared to be a property use agreement. The date showed it had been signed just 3 months before her death, when she had been in hospice care and barely able to hold a pen, let alone sign legal documents. "This signature is forged," I stated flatly, feeling my pulse pounding in my temples. "My grandmother was in hospice care on this date, heavily medicated and physically incapable of signing anything. Furthermore, she would never have agreed to this. She specifically purchased this property because it was outside homeowner association jurisdiction." I dropped the paper back onto the table as if it were contaminated. "I want all bookings canceled immediately, my property removed from your website, and any funds returned to these people you have defrauded." Cynthia's smile hardened into something predatory. "That is quite an accusation, Mr. Foster. The agreement is legally binding, witnessed by 2 board members. Your grandmother understood that maintaining a property of historical significance requires community support." A woman sitting next to Cynthia nodded vigorously. "The Heritage Sites program helps preserve Willowbrook's character while generating maintenance funds. It is really in everyone's best interest." I recognized her as Sharon Peterson, who owned the luxury boutique in town. "The arrangement specifies that 60% of booking fees go toward property upkeep," she added, as if this were some generous concession. "I have received exactly $0 for property upkeep," I countered, making air quotes with my fingers, "and I have never agreed to any such arrangement. Where has this money been going?" The uncomfortable glances exchanged around the table told me everything I needed to know. Cynthia cleared her throat, straightening the already straight pen beside her notepad. "There has been a reserve fund established, of course. We were planning to approach you about necessary improvements once you had settled in. The previous bookings were made during the transition period after your grandmother's passing." Her words were honeyed, but I could sense the desperation beneath. "How many?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Excuse me," Cynthia blinked, her composure slipping slightly. "How many bookings have you taken for my property?" Sharon Peterson jumped in, apparently trying to diffuse the situation. "Just 3 this season, the Thornton wedding this month and 2 more in June and July. All very tasteful events, I assure you." I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "I will be speaking with my attorney about this immediately. In the meantime, I suggest you start making phone calls to explain to these people that you have been selling access to property you do not own or control." I turned to leave, but Cynthia's voice stopped me at the door. "Mr. Foster, I strongly advise against making this difficult. Willowbrook Estates represents over 300 homeowners with significant influence in this community. The Heritage Sites program has been very popular, bringing tourism dollars to local businesses." I turned back slowly. "Is that a threat, Miss Morgan?" Her smile returned, brittle as thin ice. "Simply a statement of fact. Sometimes it is better to be a team player." The implied threat followed me like a shadow as I drove straight to the law office of James Harrington, my grandmother's attorney and a family friend. His practice was housed in a converted Victorian on Main Street, its gingerbread trim and wide porch a testament to the town's earlier days. James's secretary ushered me straight into his wood-paneled office, where the 60-something lawyer listened with increasing alarm as I explained the situation. "This is outrageous," he muttered, examining the forged agreement I had photographed with my phone. "Eleanor would never have agreed to this. She was fiercely protective of her privacy and her gardens, and the signature is not even a good forgery. Look here," he pointed to the screen. "Eleanor's had a distinctive loop. This does not even come close." James promised to send a cease and desist letter immediately, but his weathered face betrayed concern. "Cynthia Morgan has accumulated considerable power in this town, Michael. Her husband sits on the city council, her brother-in-law is a judge, and the homeowner association wields significant influence with local businesses. This will not be a simple matter of legal right and wrong, it is going to get political." I nodded, already suspecting as much from Cynthia's veiled threat. "What do they actually stand to gain from this?" I asked. "Even with multiple bookings we are talking about $20,000 or $30,000 a year in venue fees. That seems like small potatoes for the risk they are taking." James leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "I suspect this is about more than money, Michael. Your grandmother's property is the last large parcel in that area not under homeowner association control. It is a 5-acre green space surrounded by increasingly dense development. My guess is the heritage program is just the first step in establishing some form of control over the property." He rummaged through a file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "Eleanor suspected something like this might happen. She asked me to give you this if there were ever any challenges to the property's independence." Inside the folder were land surveys, original deeds, and documentation showing that my grandmother had repeatedly rejected offers from developers and the homeowner association to purchase or incorporate her land. Most interesting was a letter from the city, dated just a year before her death, confirming that attempts to rezone the property or claim it through eminent domain had been rejected. "She knew they would come after it," I murmured, feeling a renewed connection to my grandmother's foresight. James nodded. "Eleanor was nobody's fool. She left you not just the property but the ammunition to defend it." As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities. A cease and desist letter would establish a legal position, but it would not solve the immediate problem of the Thornton wedding scheduled in just 3 weeks, and something told me Cynthia Morgan was not going to back down easily. She had too much invested in this scheme, both financially and in terms of her reputation. Back at the house I walked the property, seeing it with new eyes, not just as my grandmother's beloved home but as a valuable piece of real estate others were scheming to control. The gardens, even in their currently neglected state, were breathtaking. Spring bulbs pushed through the soil in chaotic but beautiful profusion. The gazebo, though needing paint, stood gracefully at the center of what had once been a rose garden. I could understand why brides would be drawn to this setting, but that did not give anyone the right to trespass or profit from my property without permission. As evening fell, I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon, contemplating my next move. My brooding was interrupted by the arrival of a beat-up blue pickup truck that pulled into my driveway. A tall, wiry man in his 70s emerged, moving with the deliberate grace of someone who had spent a lifetime doing physical labor. I recognized Walter Jenkins, my grandmother's groundskeeper, who had retired shortly before her death. "Heard you were having some trouble with the Morgan woman," he called as he approached the porch. News traveled fast in small towns. "Mind if I join you?" I gestured to the empty chair beside me, and Walter settled in with a grunt of satisfaction. "Your grandmother would be spinning in her grave if she knew what they were trying to pull," he said without preamble. "Been watching them circle this place like vultures for years." Walter declined my offer of bourbon but accepted a glass of water. "They started small," he continued. "First it was just comments about the height of the grass or branches hanging over the property line, then came the letters about community standards and how the gardens could be shared resources." Walter's weathered face creased with disgust. "Your grandmother told Cynthia to pound sand, in those exact words. I was standing right here when she said it." I could not help but smile, picturing my gentle but fiercely independent grandmother delivering that message. "So now they have escalated to forging her signature and selling access to the property. I mused. The question is, what do I do about the Thornton wedding in 3 weeks? Walter took a thoughtful sip of water. Well, seems to me you have got 3 options. 1. You go along with it, let them hold their wedding and fight the larger battle later. 2. You get your lawyer to shut it down, deal with the fallout from a disappointed bride and her 200 guests. Or 3. His eyes twinkled with mischief, you find a creative way to make sure nobody wants to have their fancy wedding here. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this third option. What did you have in mind? Walter chuckled. Your grandmother always said, sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable people is to be spectacularly unreasonable yourself, make it memorable. Over the next hour, Walter filled me in on the local politics I had missed during my years away. Cynthia Morgan had transformed the once restrained Willowbrook Estates Homeowner Association into her personal fiefdom, using increasingly strict rules to force out homeowners who opposed her vision or questioned her authority. The Heritage Sites program had begun with legitimately registered historical buildings whose owners had willingly participated, but as the program grew more profitable, properties were added without proper permission, always with the same justification of preserving community character while generating funds that seemed to disappear into administrative costs. Most folks are too intimidated to fight back, Walter explained. Cynthia's husband can make life difficult for local businesses through selective enforcement of city codes. Her social circle includes every influential person in town, they close ranks. He drained his water glass and stood to leave. But your grandmother taught me something important. Bullies only maintain power when people are afraid to challenge them, and Eleanor Foster's grandson should not be afraid of the likes of Cynthia Morgan. As his truck disappeared down the driveway, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I would not just defend my property, I would make such a spectacular example of Cynthia's overreach that she would never dare try something like this again. The next morning brought a response to the cease and desist letter, not from Cynthia directly, but from the Homeowner Association's attorney. The carefully worded document acknowledged my ownership of the property while insisting that the Heritage Sites agreement was binding due to my grandmother's signature, and suggesting that any disruption to planned events would result in legal action for breach of contract and damages. James called to discuss next steps, but I already had a plan forming, one that would require precise timing and a bit of theatrical flair. Hold off on responding, I told him, I have an idea that might solve this problem more effectively than a legal battle. My first step was research. I spent hours online learning everything I could about Rebecca Thornton, the bride who had unwittingly become entangled in Cynthia's scheme. Social media revealed she was a local realtor, working for the same agency that handled most of Willowbrook Estates' property transactions. Her fiancé James Caldwell was a developer whose company had built the newest section of the Homeowner Association community. The connections were becoming clearer. This was not just any wedding, it was a social and business alliance between families deeply embedded in Cynthia's power structure. No wonder she was so determined to make it happen. Next, I contacted several local businesses, careful to avoid those with close ties to the Homeowner Association. I made appointments, explained my situation, and was surprised by how many people were eager to help once they understood what was happening. It seemed Walter was right. There was significant resentment towards Cynthia's tactics simmering beneath the surface of Willowbrook's picture-perfect exterior. By the end of the week, I had assembled everything I needed for what my grandmother would have called a strategic demonstration of consequences. The Saturday before the scheduled wedding, I was ready. I deliberately maintained radio silence with both Cynthia and the Homeowner Association's attorney, letting them believe I might be intimidated by their legal threats. At precisely 7:30 in the morning, just late enough to be legal under the town's noise ordinance, but early enough to ensure maximum attention, 3 large trucks rumbled up my driveway. The first carried a portable toilet company, whose workers began efficiently placing 20 bright blue portable toilets in a neat row across my front lawn. The second truck brought a pest control company, whose employees started placing large yellow warning pest treatment in progress signs around the property perimeter. The third and most impressive was from Johnson's Demolition and Excavation, complete with a small bulldozer on a trailer. I had warned my immediate neighbors about the commotion, explaining truthfully that I was undertaking significant landscape renovations. Most were sympathetic once they heard about the Homeowner Association's overreach. It turned out Cynthia had made few friends with her heavy-handed tactics. As workers in high-visibility vests swarmed across my property, I noticed curtains twitching in several Willowbrook Estates homes visible from my backyard. It took less than 30 minutes for the first curious onlookers to gather on the sidewalk, and exactly 45 minutes for a sleek silver Mercedes to come screeching into my driveway. Cynthia Morgan emerged like a thundercloud in human form, designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly highlighted hair, wearing what appeared to be tennis clothes, though I had never once seen her actually play. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, gesturing wildly at the activity around us. I smiled pleasantly, clipboard in hand, as I checked off items on my list. "Good morning, Cynthia. Just getting the property ready for some major renovations. The entire backyard is being redesigned. New drainage, excavation for a koi pond, complete replanting." I gestured to the bulldozer being unloaded from its trailer. "We are starting on Monday morning bright and early." Cynthia's face went through a fascinating range of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally dawning horror. "Monday? You cannot possibly be serious. The Thornton Caldwell wedding is next Saturday." I affected a look of innocent confusion. "Wedding? Oh, you must be referring to the event you scheduled on my property without permission. Yes, I suppose this would interfere with that, would it not?" I tapped my chin thoughtfully. Terrible timing, but since I never agreed to host any wedding, and since this is my private property, I am free to make whatever improvements I see fit. The portable toilets are for the work crew, by the way. They will be here for at least 3 weeks. As if on cue, Rebecca Thornton's car pulled in behind Cynthia's, the bride-to-be leaping out with her phone clutched in her hand. "What is happening here?" she cried, taking in the portable toilets and pest control signs with visible distress. "I just got calls from 3 different neighbors." Cynthia turned to her, clearly struggling to maintain composure. "Rebecca, darling, there has been a slight misunderstanding with Mr. Foster about the Heritage Sites program. I am sure we can work something out." She turned back to me, lowering her voice. "Be reasonable, Michael. We can discuss compensation, or perhaps some sort of compromise." I shook my head, maintaining my pleasant tone even as I stood my ground. "There is no misunderstanding, Cynthia. You forged my grandmother's signature and have been selling access to my property without permission. I have decided that rather than pursue legal action for fraud, trespassing, and misrepresentation, I will simply exercise my right to improve my property however I see fit." I turned to Rebecca, whose mascara was already beginning to run as tears welled in her eyes. "Miss Thornton, I am truly sorry that you have been caught in the middle of this. You should know that Cynthia never had the right to offer my property as a venue. Whatever money you paid for this location was taken under false pretenses." Rebecca turned to Cynthia, confusion giving way to anger. "You told me everything was arranged. You said the new owner had honored all existing bookings." Cynthia's composure cracked further. "It is a simple miscommunication. Mr. Foster is being difficult about a technicality." I interrupted smoothly. "Forgery is not a technicality, Cynthia. Neither is fraud." I pulled out my phone and showed Rebecca the forged document with my grandmother's signature. This was supposedly signed when my grandmother was in hospice care, barely conscious. "The homeowner association has been taking venue fees for my property without my knowledge or consent. I never received a penny of the money you paid." The color drained from Rebecca's face as the full implications hit her. "I paid $8,000 for this venue, the rentals, the catering, the flowers. Everything is designed around this garden setting. Where am I supposed to find another location in 7 days?" Her voice rose with each word, drawing the attention of the workers and the growing crowd of onlookers. Cynthia grabbed Rebecca's arm, trying to steer her away. "Let us discuss this privately. I am sure we can find an alternative." But Rebecca shook her off, years of bridal planning stress focusing into a laser beam of rage directed squarely at Cynthia Morgan. "You promised me the most beautiful venue in Willowbrook. You showed me the pictures. You handled everything. And now you are telling me it was all based on a lie." Rebecca was now practically shouting, her voice carrying clearly to the neighbors gathered at the edge of the property. Cynthia's attempts to quiet her only seemed to fuel her fury. 200 guests, Cynthia, some flying in from California. Where are they supposed to go? Your backyard." The suggestion seemed to horrify Cynthia, whose own meticulously landscaped but modestly sized property was certainly not equipped for a large-scale wedding. I stepped back, allowing the scene to unfold without interference. More cars were arriving now, Rebecca's mother, her wedding planner, and several friends, drawn by frantic text messages. The quiet Saturday morning had transformed into exactly the sort of public spectacle Cynthia Morgan would have done anything to avoid. With each new arrival, the story spread, how the homeowner association president had sold access to property she did not control, how she had forged an elderly woman's signature, how the wedding venue did not actually exist. Watching Cynthia's carefully cultivated authority crumbling in real time was admittedly satisfying, but I felt genuine sympathy for Rebecca and her fiancé, who arrived shortly afterward looking shell-shocked. As the chaos reached its peak, with Rebecca sobbing, her mother demanding refunds, and Cynthia trying desperately to regain control of the narrative, I quietly approached James Caldwell, the groom. "Mr. Caldwell, a word in private." I led him away from the crowd toward the relative quiet of the front porch. "I want to be clear, my issue is with Cynthia Morgan and the homeowner association, not with you and your fiancé. You are innocent victims in this situation." James ran a hand through his hair, the picture of a man watching his wedding plans implode in real time. "What do you suggest we do? Rebecca has been planning this for over a year." I smiled slightly. "I actually have a suggestion, if you are interested. I know the owner of Willow Creek Lodge. They had a cancellation for next Saturday, a corporate event that fell through. The venue is available, including their gardens and ballroom. It is not identical to this setting, but it is beautiful in its own right." James stared at me in disbelief. "How do you know this?" I shrugged. "I made some calls when I realized this confrontation was inevitable. I did not want your wedding to be collateral damage in my dispute with the homeowner association." I handed him a business card with the lodge manager's contact information. "They are expecting your call, and because they are as disgusted by Cynthia's behavior as I am, they are offering a significant discount." James studied me for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Thank you, this is unexpectedly decent of you." I shook his hand firmly. "Consider it a wedding gift, and perhaps a reminder that not everyone in Willowbrook operates the way Cynthia does." As James returned to Rebecca with this potential solution, I noticed Walter Jenkins had joined the spectators, a broad grin splitting his weathered face as he gave me a thumbs up from behind Cynthia's back. The theatrical display had achieved exactly what I had hoped, a public exposure of Cynthia's methods that could not be swept under the rug or dismissed as a private dispute. The fallout was swift and far-reaching. By afternoon, the local social media groups were buzzing with the story, complete with pictures of the portable toilets and pest control signs. Several other property owners came forward with similar stories of being pressured to join the Heritage Sites program, though none had experienced outright forgery. The Homeowner Association board called an emergency meeting, where Cynthia faced uncomfortable questions about the program's finances. The booking fees, totaling nearly $50,000 over the past year, had been diverted to an administrative account that funded, among other things, renovations to the Homeowner Association clubhouse and an extravagant board appreciation dinner. James Harrington called on Sunday, chuckling as he delivered the news. "The Homeowner Association board has placed Cynthia on administrative leave pending an investigation. They are sending formal apologies to everyone involved in the Heritage Sites program and offering full refunds." He paused, savoring the next bit of information, "and the City Council, including Cynthia's husband, has formally acknowledged that your property remains outside homeowner jurisdiction with no heritage designation unless you choose to pursue one." I smiled, picturing Cynthia's husband distancing himself from her schemes to save his own political career and Rebecca's wedding. I asked, "Relocated to Willow Creek Lodge with minimal drama." "From what I hear, the lodge owner is apparently delighted with the last-minute booking and the publicity. He is even throwing in a free champagne toast for all guests." James' voice grew more serious. "You handled this rather brilliantly, Michael. Your grandmother would have approved of both your backbone and your compassion for the innocent parties." Coming from someone who had known Eleanor Foster for decades, this was high praise indeed. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The property was secure, Cynthia's overreach had been exposed, and even the wedding would proceed without disruption, just not in my backyard. On Monday morning, most of the theatrical elements of my protest were removed, the portable toilets were collected, the pest control signs taken down. I kept the demolition equipment a bit longer, partly because I actually did want to make some landscape improvements, and partly as a visible reminder that I was not to be trifled with. As I was reviewing plans with the excavation foreman, a modest sedan pulled into the driveway. Sharon Peterson emerged, looking considerably less polished than she had at the homeowner association meeting. "Mr. Foster," she called, approaching with visible trepidation. "I owe you an apology." I invited her onto the porch, where she declined my offer of coffee but seemed grateful to sit. "I wanted you to know that most of the board had no idea Cynthia was adding properties without permission," she began. "We thought all the participants had voluntarily joined the Heritage Program." She twisted her hands in her lap, clearly uncomfortable. When questions were raised about certain properties, Cynthia assured us everything was properly documented. The forgery, that was entirely her doing, not a board action. I studied her face, seeing what appeared to be genuine remorse. "And the money," I asked, "were you aware of where the booking fees were going?" Sharon winced. "We were told the funds were being held in escrow for property maintenance minus administrative costs. It was not until yesterday's emergency meeting that we saw the actual accounts." She shook her head slowly. 90% was classified as administrative, with only 10% reserved for the properties themselves, and even that had not been distributed. She straightened her shoulders, meeting my eyes directly. "I have resigned from the board, several others have as well. We are recommending a complete restructuring of the homeowner association leadership with proper checks and balances." I nodded, appreciating her candor. "What will happen to Cynthia?" Sharon's expression hardened slightly. "There is talk of criminal charges for the forgery and misappropriation of funds. At minimum, she is finished in Willowbrook, her husband is facing questions about how much he knew, and her real estate license is under review." She stood to leave, then hesitated. "Your grandmother was respected in this community, Mr. Foster. What Cynthia did, using her name and property without permission, that was not right. I should have asked more questions." With that, she returned to her car, the first of several board members who would make similar pilgrimages of apology over the coming days. The following Saturday, as Rebecca and James exchanged vows at Willow Creek Lodge, surrounded by their 200 guests, I was in my grandmother's gardens, hands deep in fertile soil, as I planted the first of many rose bushes that would eventually restore the property to its former glory. Walter Jenkins had come out of retirement to help, bringing cuttings he had preserved from Eleanor's original plants. "You know," he said as we worked side by side, "your grandmother always said gardens were a lesson in patience and consequence. Plant the right seeds, tend them properly, and eventually you reap the beauty you have sown. Same goes for dealing with people, I suppose." I smiled, brushing dirt from my hands, as I looked around at the property that had now been definitively secured from those who would exploit it. "She was a wise woman," I agreed, "and now everyone in Willowbrook understands that her grandson inherited more than just her land." Walter chuckled, his weathered face creasing with genuine amusement. "Indeed they do. Between the portable toilets and the bulldozer, I would say you made an impression that will not soon be forgotten." In the distance, we could see new signs being installed at the entrance to Willowbrook Estates, announcing the newly elected Homeowner Association Board and their commitment to transparent, respectful community governance. As spring deepened into summer, the gardens began their slow transformation back to life. The gazebo received a fresh coat of paint, the paths were cleared and raved, and the first roses bloomed in spectacular profusion. Cynthia Morgan and her husband sold their Willowbrook Estates home and moved to Florida, their departure hastened by the legal consequences of her actions, a 2-year probation sentence for fraud and forgery, plus substantial financial penalties. The Heritage Sites program was disbanded, replaced by a voluntary historical registry with clear guidelines and open financial management. In a surprising twist, Rebecca and James sent me a thank you note and a bottle of costly champagne after their honeymoon. "Thanks for saving our wedding and showing the truth," the card read. The lodge was perfect and everyone agreed the drama made for a much better story than a typical ceremony would have. Enclosed was a wedding photo showing the happy couple in Willow Creek's gardens, looking not at all upset by their last-minute venue change. I placed the picture on my shelf, A reminder that sometimes the path to justice takes unexpected turns. A year later, when the gardens had been fully fixed and the house repairs completed, I hosted a garden party for the neighbors, including many from Willowbrook Estates who had previously viewed my property with jealousy or bitterness. Under twinkling lights strung through the old oak trees, with music playing softly and the scent of roses filling the evening air, even former homeowner association board members commented on how right it felt to see the Foster property restored to its former glory. "Your grandmother would be proud," Walter told me as we watched guests wandering the lighted paths, "not just of the gardens but of how you protected her honor." I raised my glass in a silent toast to Eleanor Foster, whose wisdom and strength of character had guided me even in her absence. In the end, the planned wedding that never happened had led to something far more valuable, a true community gathering based on shared respect rather than pressure or fraud. And if the occasional bride approached me about hosting a real, properly arranged wedding in these beautiful gardens, well, that would be entirely my choice, made with my full agreement and without a single portable toilet or bulldozer in sight.